Look at an old photograph from the early Jungian circle. Carl Jung is easy to find. The white hair, the heavy gaze, the face that now appears on thousands of videos about dreams and shadows. Beside him stands a woman. Unless you already know the history, your eye may pass over her. Her name was Toni Wolff. And that photograph contains a small historical trick. Jung arrives with a name. Wolff often arrives as a relationship. Patient, confidant, collaborator, lover. Those descriptions are part of the record, but they can also become a curtain. Once the private drama begins, her own psychological work disappears behind it. So why did Jung later describe her as his friend and collaborator for more than 40 years? Why did he credit her with practical methods, theoretical formulation, and the long group experiment of the psychology club in Zurich? And what was the 4-part map she left behind? A map that is strange, dated, and still capable of asking an uncomfortable question. This is not a story about proving that Toni Wolff secretly invented Jungian psychology. The evidence does not support that melodrama. It is a more interesting story. How a woman can be close enough to the center of an intellectual movement to help shape it, yet survive in popular memory mainly as a character in the famous man's life. Wolff was born in Zurich in 1888. She became a Jungian analyst and an important figure in the early analytical psychology community. The Psychology Club Zurich records that she served as its president from 1928 to 1945, remained on its board, and was elected honorary president in 1952. This was not the position of an occasional guest. The club had been founded in 1916 as a place where analytical psychology could be tested beyond the private consulting room. Jung later wrote that Wolff had recognized the importance of the group problem early, and that her years as president gave her unusual material for observing how individual psychology changes inside a collective. That acknowledgement matters because it comes from Jung in a published introduction to her essays. It does not settle every question about authorship or influence. It does something more basic. It makes it impossible to describe Wolff honestly as merely a private companion who happened to be nearby. It also changes how we read the early Jungian movement. Ideas do not develop only inside books. They develop in rooms where cases are discussed, disagreements are tested, and a new vocabulary either survives contact with other minds or collapses. Wolff occupied those rooms for decades. Her authority in the club did not make her Jung's equal in fame, and it does not allow us to assign his published ideas to her, but it does show that analytical psychology grew through a network, not through one isolated genius. That distinction protects the story from two opposite mistakes. The first is erasure. Jung did the thinking while everyone around him merely watched. The second is romantic correction. Every overlooked collaborator must have been the true source behind the famous name. Both stories are easy because both remove uncertainty. The record gives us something less cinematic and more credible. Wolff contributed work of her own, influenced a living community, and remained entangled with Jung personally and intellectually. Her importance does not require a conspiracy. But the strongest evidence is not a photograph or a testimonial. It is a slim essay. Wolff first presented the material that became Structural Forms of the Feminine Psyche at the Psychology Club in 1934. She delivered a more detailed version at the C.G. Jung Institute in 1948. It appeared in German in 1951, and an English translation was privately printed for the Institute students in 1956, 3 years after her death. The essay proposes 4 structural forms: mother, Hetaira, Amazon, and medial woman. The names can sound like costumes from mythology. Read quickly, they invite exactly the wrong response. Which one am I? Which one is my partner? Which box explains everything? Wolff's actual diagram is more demanding. It is a cross with 4 positions. Mother and Hetaira face one another across one axis. Amazon and medial woman face one another across the other. One form usually dominates, another may become available, and the remaining forms stay more difficult or unconscious. She also warns that an outer way of life does not necessarily reveal the inner structure. A mother may not be psychologically organized by the mother form. A professional woman may not be an Amazon. The map concerns orientation, not costume. Enter the first room. The mother orientation notices what is developing, vulnerable, or in need of protection. At its best, it provides shelter without owning the person being sheltered. It teaches, nourishes, and strengthens what is unfinished so that it can eventually stand alone. Its distortion begins when care cannot release its object. Help becomes supervision. Protection becomes doubt in another person's strength. The caregiver needs to be needed, and another life becomes the stage on which her unlived life is performed. The room that was meant to protect growth quietly prevents it. Across the axis is the Hetaira. The Old Greek word is difficult for a modern audience because it arrives with sexual and historical associations. In Wolff's map, its psychological center is individual relationship. The Hetaira notices the particular person beneath social role, status, and collective expectation. She is oriented towards psychological nuance. What this person is becoming, what remains hidden, what a relationship might awaken. At its best, this room gives a human being the experience of being seen as more than a function. At its worst, personal intensity becomes the only reality. Practical obligations look shallow. Boundaries become betrayals. The relationship is idealized until two people lose contact with the world outside it. Wolff's language here is thoroughly shaped by heterosexual assumptions and the social world in which she wrote. That limitation cannot be edited away, but the underlying contrast is still recognizable. Care organized around development is not the same as attention organized around the uniqueness of a relationship. The third room is the Amazon. For Wolff, the Amazon is oriented toward objective achievement and cultural values. She does not derive her identity from a psychological relationship to a man. She wants to do the work, earn the distinction, master the field, and stand inside the public world under her own name. In 1951, that claim carried obvious force. Wolff was describing a form of feminine life that could not be reduced to wifehood, motherhood, or private inspiration. Yet she also saw its possible distortion. Achievement can become the only language the psyche trusts. Patience with vulnerability disappears. Relationships become instruments, and anything unfinished is treated as inefficiency. Now the diagram has a tension. Mother and Hetaira are personally related in different ways. Amazon is oriented toward impersonal, conscious cultural values. But the fourth room is impersonal in another direction. It opens not toward public achievement, but toward what a group or an era has not yet managed to say. Wolff called it the medial woman. She did not mean simply a spiritualist medium. She built the term around being in the middle, mediator, carrier, a person unusually receptive to collective psychological material. This orientation senses what is in the atmosphere before it has a clear name, the image, fear, conflict, or possibility that a community is carrying without admitting it. That sounds glamorous until Wolff describes the danger. Receptivity without discrimination can dissolve the boundary between personal and collective, between what belongs to me and what belongs to the room. A person may feel chosen by every powerful image, mistake intensity for truth, or act out a conflict that belongs partly to the group. The positive task is not to become more possessed. It is to become a mediator instead of a mere medium. To develop language, judgment, and enough stability to give form to what would otherwise remain contagious and confused. If hidden contributors to Jungian psychology matter to you, keep Beyond Jung close. Wolff's 4 rooms are where a biography turns back into an idea. This is the point at which the model stops behaving like a personality quiz. Wolff says that all 4 forms are inherent, although one is normally more consistent with a person's nature. Over time, another form may press toward consciousness. If that development does not occur, the dominant form can exaggerate itself and turn negative. Care becomes control. Relationship becomes enchantment. Achievement becomes hardness. Receptivity becomes possession. The map's real subject is not identity. It is one-sidedness. This is why the 4 rooms should not be ranked from primitive to advanced. There is no winning room. Each carries a form of intelligence that the others can neglect. Care recognizes growth before achievement can measure it. Individual relationship sees a person whom collective duty may flatten. Achievement gives durable form to intentions that intimacy alone cannot complete. Receptivity notices the unspoken psychic weather in which every private decision occurs. The conflict begins when one intelligence declares itself sufficient. Imagine someone whose first answer to every difficulty is care. A colleague is struggling, so she helps. A friend is confused, so she advises. A partner is uncertain, so she organizes. These actions may be generous, but if care is the only available room, another person's independence can feel like abandonment. The strength has become a closed system. Or imagine someone who can accomplish almost anything but has no language for dependency, ambiguity, or psychic atmosphere. Every private conflict becomes a project plan. Every grief receives a deadline. The Amazon capacity is real, but its opposite territory remains locked. Wolff believed that contact with neglected forms belongs to psychological development. She compared the most difficult 4th form to Jung's inferior function. It cannot simply be performed as a new lifestyle. It has to be approached symbolically because it challenges the identity that consciousness has built. This creates the episode's late problem. Should we accept Wolff's map? Not as timeless psychological science. The essay contains broad claims about women and men, feminine nature, sexuality, religion, and culture that belong to early and mid-20th century analytical psychology. It was not built from contemporary population research. It does not account adequately for gender diversity, changing social roles, or the many ways power shapes what looks like personal structure. Even the 4 names carry cultural assumptions that can mislead before the analysis begins. A responsible reading cannot turn Mother, Hetaira, Amazon, and Medial woman into diagnoses. It cannot tell a woman what she essentially is, and it certainly cannot be used to explain strangers from a distance. But historical limitation is not the same as total uselessness. Read as a hypothesis about relational orientations, the model preserves a sharp observation. Human strengths become dangerous when they are the only strengths we can imagine. Care, intimacy, achievement, and receptivity each reveal something. Each can also colonize the whole personality. That is why the 4th room matters. It is not automatically the mystical room. It is the mode that your preferred identity cannot easily respect. For the compulsive achiever, it may be dependence or atmosphere. For the compulsive caregiver, it may be impersonal work. For the person who lives through intense relationships, it may be a value that does not depend on being understood. For the person flooded by collective feeling, it may be the plain boundary of an ordinary fact. The better modern question is therefore not, which of Wolff's women am I? It is, which mode has become my only answer? And what does it force me not to see? That question also turns back toward Wolff herself. Popular history placed her in a single room, the intimate woman beside Jung. It made relationship her entire meaning. Yet the institutional record shows an analyst, a club president, a theoretical writer, and a participant in the formation of a psychological community. The biography trap performed the very reduction her map warns against. If you want the people beside Jung restored to the picture, stay with me. The next forgotten name may change which part of analytical psychology you thought belonged to Jung alone. There is no need to make Toni Wolff a hidden mastermind. That would replace one distortion with another. Nor do we need to rescue every sentence of her theory from its period. Recognition can be more exact than worship. Return to the photograph. This time, the caption does not say only Carl Jung and an unidentified woman. It says Carl Jung and Toni Wolff. Jung remains in the frame, so does the documented intimacy. But beside those facts now stand a date, an institution, an essay, and a 4-room plan. 3 doors are open, 1 remains closed. Which room in your own psychological language is hardest to enter without contempt?